It's time to take a deep breath and quiet the mind. Every breath and thought was energy that brought us to our experience in this moment. We are going to exercise our beliefs in the possible. We will bend and create our own realities. Let's explore how to square our recovery and thrive in life. I welcome you to Recovery Squared Radio with your host, Steve Wofford.
Welcome to Recovery Squared Radio. I'm Steve Wofford. I have Joseph Sanchez with me here today, and he is a president and co-founder of Recovery ATX up in Austin, Texas. Joseph, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about Recovery ATX? What is it exactly?
Recovery ATX is a nonprofit recovery community organization that provides peer-based recovery support services, as well as outreach work. And we do a lot of planning of events and activities that support people early and, starting that recovery process. We have weekly programming, meditation, yoga, qigong, what we also do recreational events and activities and education for the recovery community and addiction professionals as well. Some of that looks like naloxone training and overdose prevention. The events and activities are softball tournaments, bowling events. We also have golf tournament that is our annual fundraiser as well. So a lot of fun things that really make recovery and being in recovery fun, interesting, engaging, and very community building. One of the things that we like to do is bring the community together, and we collaborate with a whole bunch of organizations, in order to make things, cost effective for people that are participating. And building partnerships with other organizations allows us to, as a community, have a broader reach and a broader scope and be able to support more people in recovery and in the community as well as family members.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely align with a number of things you're doing. And I mean, that's why we're talking here today, because I love the work you're doing in the community and then also making recovery fun. The yoga, the sporting events are all fun, but you're also doing some education type stuff, which I think is very important for the recovery community in general. So, one of the reasons, I have people on this show is people that are quote unquote squaring their recovery. They're taking their recovery to the next level, right? And you are a fine example of that. And I love all the work you're doing, and that's why we're having this show. And so what I'm interested to know is most people just don't wake up and go, hey, I'm going to start this community event around recovery, right? Like, what brought you to this point where you're like, hey, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to lead the community? I really commend you for that. And that's awesome that you're doing that. But what brought you to do something like this?
Honestly, Steve, I'd have to take you back to when I first started my recovery process. And so I got gracefully placed into treatment back in 2005 in El Paso, Texas, where I'm from. I had been house sitting for my parents. And during that time, I was really, really deep into my addiction. And left a huge mess emotionally, spiritually, and, physically at my parents' house. And, they put me into detox, and I was there for about 5 to 7 days. And about the 6th day, my parents showed up with extra luggage and they told me that I'd be, going to a 30-day, facility. And this facility wasn't like any other type of treatment center. It was run and managed by people in recovery. They didn't have really a clinical aspect, but what they did was they used their, lived experience in recovery in their own process to kind of guide the participants to find their pathway of recovery and support them along the way. And so it was an awesome experience to, have that connection, not just with the people that were, in the process with me, but also too, from people that have been there literally and done that. And so we did, tons of different groups around addiction, around recovery. We went to 12-step meetings every day and even, different other types of pathways of recovery, and had that opportunity to really find what worked for us And so they did recovery coaching, and that was kind of a, one-on-one, what do you want your recovery to look like? What's going to get in the way? What are your goals? And, how can we help you to, achieve those goals? In my addiction, I can honestly tell you that I had no passion, no drive, no desire to do or make anything of my life. And through that process, I wanted to, give back to that facility. So I, went back and I volunteered and found a sense of purpose and, kind of carrying that message of hope and recovery that, recovery is possible. And after about, I would say 6 months in recovery, they asked me to move back in and become residential staff. And so I too, helped people, in their process, took them to their meetings and whatnot. I was on kitchen duty and had to feed, and cook for 28 people. And it was great. And I thank the executive director, Ben Bass, for seeing, some potential in me and giving me the opportunity to not only give back in that aspect, but also to grow. So after, I would say, another 6 months kind of being residential staff there, the organization got a federal grant, which gave them the opportunity to, come together with other organizations similar to that place and, kind of brainstorm and network and, exchange ideas and learn from each other. And so I had the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. and meet all these different organizations and, be placed in situations where I wouldn't say forced, but was given the, opportunity to grow. And so I got to see and engage with a lot of recovery leaders across the United States and get really involved in the recovery movement. And so I worked there in El Paso for the first 5 years of my recovery, became a recovery coach and a trainer of recovery coaches. And then also too, I was in charge of, community building. And one of the things that we did is we reached out to the recovery community and provided different events and activities that really pulled the community close together and, gave them an opportunity to create this unity of people in recovery in El Paso. And it was beautiful. So the main two, recovery pathways or fellowships there were, two different types of 12-step fellowship programs. Usually they operate in silos, don't really come together, singleness of purpose and whatnot. And with events like, Recovery Under the Stars and, some Thanksgiving events and some holiday events, we were able to reach out into those communities and pull them together and, celebrate, not only, whatever holiday it was, but also to life and recovery. And it was awesome. It was really awesome to see how united that community was. And about 2010, I moved here to Austin and worked for a recovery community organization and was just kind of looking around and taking Austin in and the recovery community. And I saw a lot of silos, a lot of, disunity. And there were so many different opportunities to bring everybody together and really celebrate and, be vocal about recovery support services, and also too, around the lack of financial support and services that were needed for those in and seeking recovery. And from my experience, I know that a unified voice carries a strong message. And here in Austin, being, capital city, we had the opportunity to really come together and be a face and voice for recovery. But everybody was, in their different silos and communities and tribes and really didn't come together for stuff. So we started Recovery ATX back in 2012 with that kind of goal in mind to bring the recovery community together. And from my experience, one of the things that we do in order to build a relationship, not only between, people and potential romantic relationships, but also with the community, you have to kind of date them. You have to get to know them. They have to get to know you, and you have to build trust. And so, we've been doing that for quite some time and really engaging the community and asking them what they want, what they're interested in, what they feel is lacking within the community. And so through a series of assessments, recovery community assessments, we were able to see that, some folks wanted some, events and activities, not just, the mediocre, recovery dance where, there's great music and only two people are dancing. And then you have,
right.
sober houses or treatment centers, standing on the walls, being wallflowers. And it's having that feel of like a high school dance. And so one of the things that, we heard is that people wanted more resources around meditation. And we met a great leader here in Austin that did a lot of facilitating groups around meditation. And he joined the board, and we started this, weekly meditation group that started off with 10 people. And today is about 30 to 40, sometimes 50 people strong.
Wow.
So it's just, people coming together, sitting, and finding that community and that connection. That was something beautiful.
That's awesome.
And from there, our programming, just kind of, built out until we saw an opportunity to really celebrate recovery and National Recovery Month in September. And that's when we, I think last year, so that's 2015, decided to have Austin's first annual Recovery in the Park event.
That's awesome. I love your story here because there's a lot that, with the whole recovery coaching and the process, it kind of seems to me, and I think why we probably connected was because there's this, it's more about the process of recovery than like the quote unquote religion. And so in all that is really community centered, right? When you have people along with you going through this process, it's like these magical things happen. And I'm seeing that in what you're doing with Recovery in the Park. And when I was thinking about, was it Ben Bass? Is that how
Yes.
you say his name? When you were talking about him, I remember there was a couple people early on that were, I think it was when I got my 60-day chip, one of the meeting leaders is like, Steve, you're going to help change a lot of people's lives. And I didn't really understand that at the time, but I was like, if you look at me now, it's like one person saying one thing to you, it's like, hey, it's possible. And then I also remember one of my first, what I called my real sponsor, my really first real sponsor that I really connected with. He's like, Steve, you can change 1 million people's lives. Like, let's do it. And I actually believed him, but at the time, I could barely help myself. And so I just, I really appreciate your journey. So you were talking about the silos and there was disunity, and I wanted to share my why, why I do absolutely everything I do. And originally this was kind of a business decision where you have to figure out why you're creating your products and services. But I dug deeper and I'm like, why can't I find out why I do absolutely everything I do in my life? And it comes down to one expression. It's in one of one. So as I become one and whole and complete, me and you become one. And with my listeners and everyone else, we all are one in one universe under one God. And so I really love supporting anytime I can become one with someone, whether it's just this conversation we're having right now or uploading this podcast and more people listening or supporting your event in any other way. Really, we're all becoming one. And so really, that's kind of like my mission in life. I create content and I coach people so that we can all kind of become one and create this unity. And so I love you're actually out there. You can actually have you're a visionary. You can see the disunity in places and go, hey, how can I bring all these things together? And that's that's a powerful tool or a skill to possess. So I think that's just awesome.
Yeah, I think that, there are so many different great leaders and thinkers and organizations doing a lot of great work. And for someone to, just pop up and say, hey, I'm going to do this when it's already being done, then, it really just kind of puts a rift in things. And so people have to choose, this camp or who to follow, as opposed to just, coming together and saying, okay, you do this well. How can I help you? And, we see that with a lot of different organizations that somebody's doing something well and somebody likes that idea, so they try to replicate it. And, they may do that well as, also. But the thing that happens is that, we're divided. we're divided. And as a recovery community, especially right now with this opioid epidemic, we need to be able to kind of come together, unify our voice so that we can advocate for the appropriate services for everyone. And, one of the reasons I think that people, go back to, substance use is that they don't have all the tools and all the resources or access to all that in order to really get the appropriate help that they need. So if organizations and businesses, were to come together and truly build a system of care that's recovery oriented, then less and less people would slip through the cracks. So when we try to, collaborate and partner and, share, then we end up making, a huge net that we can cast so that we can, help support, people in and seeking recovery. So what we try to do with Recovery ATX is to use that unity and that partnership and that sharing to, make the biggest impact. And, so whenever there's an organization that's doing good, we reach out and say, hey, how can we help you? I don't need to, be the say all and end all and provide, all these different services because, you provide this service, very well. Why do I want to, A, take that from you, B, try to, replicate it, and C, maybe possibly fall short, for that person. If we come together to, help one another, then we enrich each other's lives. Individually, through everybody's own recovery process, they have to work on themselves, right? And so, once we've done that, like you said, we come together and we share that, we share what we learn. And so people are able to learn from us. We are able to learn from them. We come together as a unified body in order to, do miracles in life, So it makes me think about, how crowds form, and so one person, chanting may not make an effect, but, gather hundreds of people. And that voice is amazing. That
Yes.
voice can, change policies. That voice can raise hope. That voice can, make a huge difference in changing the world.
I agree. And it just gets stronger. And the more people you have and the more support, because at the end of the day, to me, addiction is really just disconnection from your true self. Because when we live as our true selves, there's all the addictions, diseases, disorders, they just don't exist. And so when you have a body of people, it's like just a collective of energy that just helps support one another and it becomes more powerful. It's kind of like the strands of a rope, right? One is weak, but three or more, it becomes a very powerful force. So, what I really appreciate with what you're doing is when I was in recovery, I almost felt very segregated in some ways with the organizations that I was in. And for me, it wasn't enough. I needed to do yoga, meditation. And back then I didn't understand how those can help recovery. And one of the reasons I started Recovery Squared is because I wanted to put more tools out there for people so that when you get in these isolated places that you can go, hey, there's other people doing these other types of things and it's just not stuck to a particular brand, right? Because, our own process is different. To me, it's more about the process and the tools that are right for the moment. The tools that I had early on in recovery were not the tools that I need today. And today I look at recovery as just a step in my total transformation. And so I continue that lifestyle of looking for those different types of, whether it's healing modalities or types of yoga or types of meditation. And so I wanted to help kind of create this environment where people would get more exposure to that. Because not everyone's as fortunate to have, like Austin has an insane recovery community. And for me, the community out there wasn't quite as, unified, And so I had this, I kind of felt alone, right, along in the journey. I'm like, well, I feel like I need more, but it was almost like I was kind of scared to go out. Right. But when I stepped out there, I realized that there are these very loud voices where people, like you are creating this recovery movement. There's an online recovery movement. And I just think it's all beautiful. And the more, we work together, it's, the more people we can help, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, if we look at recovery holistically, not just about substance use or about mental health disorders or conditions, it's more of like, what areas of our lives, are we not operating in our full potential? And so if we are looking at health, if we are looking at, physical wellness, spiritual wellness, emotional wellness, employment, if we look at recovery holistically, we're able to, find that happiness, find that true self, as you said. And so with the lack of services and the lack of support around that, it's no wonder people, keep going back out and using, so,
Totally.
not everybody has, the best insurance. And so a lot of people have to rely on state, funded, organizations where, they do great work, but they can only, do so much. And so if we had, a lot of stuff and a lot of organizations and businesses come together to, help fill in those gaps, then we get people the support that they need so that, they're not just going to detox, that they're not just going to treatment, but also getting, supportive environments and living environments and, life skills, education and training and employment opportunities and, and so on and so on. And, I think when we come together as communities, we're able to do that. Organizations and businesses, it's really hard to do that, collaborating because everybody, is still in it for themselves. How are we going to pay for this? How are we going to pay for that? But I think as members of the community, we're able to kind of wag the dog, so to speak, and show people how to do that. And I think the recovery community has been doing that for years. I strongly believe now is the time to make more of that visible. How are we able to get somebody who's, sick and suffering the help that they need? And, and it does take a community, it does take a tribe to kind of rally around a person in their time of need to get them absolutely, well. And in that process, the community ends up healing because they come together, because they, they share resources, because they feed each other, mind, body, and spirit. And so with, just events and activities that support that process, people may come to a recovery in the park and have a great time and enjoy the music and the food and the laughter. But if, they stop and look around, they're meeting new people that are along the same, journey and process and maybe even having the same struggles. And they're able to connect, for that period of time, for that event, they're able to connect with a bigger picture that makes recovery seem more possible and instill some hope in them. And so it exists in a community, the event in a community that needs that visibility of hope, right? It's in the east side of Austin where there's a lot of cultural diversity and lower income. And so people come up and there's a party, what's going on? Where's the booze?
No.
And nobody's drinking.
Yeah. Well,
Right?
I think that's the awesome thing is that it's kind of like, not drinking and doing drugs when you have a balanced life. To me, those things just aren't needed. And what I like about this event is that it's like you can still have fun and do all those things, because I know that you probably could relate to this, but when we were in active addiction, it was kind of like, well, you need those things to have fun, right? And so it was hard for people to even understand. That just wasn't part of their reality, right? To have fun without drugs and alcohol. And so I love this it's more like a recovery lifestyle movement, if that makes sense. We're actually really to thrive and to have fun in life. There's all this great stuff to do that's not about, drinking and drugs and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Austin being the live music capital of the world, I mean, it feels right. It feels right. I was interviewed on a local radio station and, I told them, I said, hey, listen, Austin City Limits, South by Southwest, those are great events. But to enjoy that as a person in recovery when you're surrounded by a recovery hostile environment, you know, because it is, you're surrounded by drugs and alcohol. And so, you know, that's tough. So imagine, you know, recovery in the park being that, you know, hopefully getting to the size of, you know, it's absolutely, you know, a clean and sober event. There's not a substance around. And, you know, people in recovery, we do some work on ourselves that just makes our spirit shine. There's less drama, there's less fighting, there's less, you know, just that toxic environment. And it becomes peaceful, it becomes unified, it becomes just strong. And, you know, there's a reason why people in recovery, we enjoy being around them because they're authentic, because they, you know, their spirit shines. And so imagine having a musical event to South by Southwest capacity and that big with that much awesome spirit involved in that. It blows my mind, right? So, you know, everybody has, you know, some goals to, you know, get to. And I think that would be a vision of mine, to see that, you know, get to that size and that capacity and just be able to, you know, be that change, at least for the music scene here in Austin.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, you're giving me chills just thinking about that, you know, building that type of event, because those events are awesome and there's a lot of cool stuff going on. But like you said, yeah, there's also this other kind of lifestyle side that I don't know if you want to call it the dark side, but it's not the side that I really participate in anymore. So, man, I love what you're doing with this. I have one question for you. Final question. What's one thing you do to square your recovery?
So, Steve, I like to, you know, I begin my day easing into my day with mindfulness and meditation and just, you know, that awareness. And I like to carry that throughout my day. So if that means talking a little bit slower and thinking about what I'm going to say before I say it, having a meal, not only just preparing it and being mindful of what I'm doing, but even more aware. So where are my tomatoes coming from? You know, before I got onto this podcast with you, I made salsa. I love making, you know, homemade salsa. And so the chopping process of my onions, of my garlic, of my tomatoes, you know, that process alone is meditative for me. And it puts me in a place where, you know, not only am I grateful, but it puts things in perspective. You know, what am I doing? You know, how am I doing it? How is it going to nourish myself, my body? How is it going to enhance my, you know, food experience? You know, how am I going to enjoy that? And so that's just with cooking. But I also carry that process and that awareness with my relationships with people. You know, sometimes, you know, admittedly, I'll have a conversation with somebody and they'll be talking and I kind of tune out just a little bit and I'm touched by just their presence, who they are, where they came from, and knowing a little bit about them, and then realizing that that person that's talking is a miracle. You know, that they've been where they've been, they've done what they've done, but regardless of that, they're standing in front of me, and they may be telling me a joke or telling me about what they saw on Netflix, but they're there, and we're able to connect, and it touches my heart. And so after that, you know, I try not to well up a little, but, you know, I tune back into the conversation. And, you know, I do that with work as well. So that awareness, that mindfulness, you know, and being able to keep perspective of, you know, where I am in my life, but also where I am in my spiritual life and within the community and within a grander scheme of things or plan of things. And it helps to, you know, really take recovery to a whole nother level. I think that awareness and that mindfulness is great if you want to make sure that you don't use no matter what, but to enjoy life no matter what. You know, sometimes awesome. Crappy things happen. Yeah, sometimes crappy things happen, Steve, and putting things into perspective and realizing that, you know, stuff does happen, but what am I going to do with that? You know, where am I going to hold it in my body? Am I going to release it? How am I going to process it? And then also, too, how can I connect with someone else that may be going through the same thing or something similar, and how can I help them?
Wow, that's powerful, man. Well, I've got to be honest with you, this show, you sharing not only your work, but your experience through this process, it literally does touch my heart. And I try to remain present through this whole conversation. I write things down so I process it subconsciously, and to be as present as I can during this, because this is why I wanted to do this podcast, is to have conversations like this, because I wanted those heart-connected conversations. I wanted to share it with people, and a podcast was the best way to do that, man. So I'm so grateful for you, Joseph, man. And thank you for touching my heart, and thank you for touching the hearts of the people you work with and everything you're doing, man. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.
I'll include all the links to Recovery ATX and Recovery in the Park in the show notes. You can access it by visiting recoverysquared.com. I love you, and thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to Recovery Squared Radio. Please visit recoverysquared.com for access to resources on squaring your recovery. And as a reminder, act without doing. Create space between your thoughts and actions.